Hello, I'm Zoe. I'm a little bit nervous, so please bear with me.
Hey Zoe.
I'm sure you will not mind me if I have to resort back to notes, just because.
Yes, we will.
Please don't. So, as you know, this my panel is on Alice in Wonderland in Japan. This is based on a paper I wrote while I was researching. I study Japanese culture, but contemporary culture and how it's represented and commented on through anime, pretty much starting from 1989 onwards. That's my little first thing. So, without further ado, Alice in Japan. Let's see that goes. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Sorry. There'll be a lot of these interrupted moments of whoops when I get excited that technology works for me. Right, so a very unexciting quote, or exciting quote, depending if you're like me and you like academics. But it was basically after 1868, 200 years by Japan, isolating them from the rest of the world, they finally broke and decided to start trading with the rest of the world, opening up their borders. And for some unique reason, Japan and Britain decided to get kind of obsessed with each other. They both decided that that the other one was more exotic than them, and they wanted to be like that. So they started off a nice kind of relationship of trading cultural exports and interests and art. In London, in Kensington, there was the Japan Village, which I wish it was still here today because it sounds amazing, where they basically recreated a portion of like Kyoto in old-fashioned houses, and they had the tea rooms, geishas, kabuki performances, just so you would like be in Kensington, and then you're in a street in Japan. In Japan, they started bringing in more Victorian ideals, the dress sense, and the kind of like the literature and the manners. But Japan started getting a little bit like worried that they were still being seen, compared to like the rest of Asia, being seen as uncultured and a little bit like the savages, because the Victorians are all very posh and repressed. They were like, oh, some of the things you do are just not very, very Victorian. And Japan has a bit of an ego about the way the rest of the world sees it. So they decided to kind of really go, right, okay, the Victorian era, this is what we want to model our continuing future in Japanese culture. So during this period, they started bringing across literature, and curiously, they started bringing across stories that featured kind of girls, such as Little Women, Little Princess. So this love affair continued, and part of it, I feel, the reason why they kind of had a shared interest, because both societies were kind of into this like rigid social class, the structure between man and women, like adults and children. They all kind of like, they both, I mean, we've all studied the Victorian times in school. The Victorians were wonderfully repressed, behaved, children do not speak unless they are spoken to, women work at the home. It was very, very reserved. And many of you may have seen Black Butler. It is one of my favourites. It is a very interesting take on what our lovely Victorian culture is like. But as it came across, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. From Black Butler, we can kind of see that it's not really a very true representation of Victorian era, shall we say. The Japanese version of Victorians was basically a great way for Japan to kind of go, look at this kind of society built on social classes, on hierarchies, on modes of behaviour. We can use this genre to kind of like start writing, start making like stories about it, without ever admitting that our society is doing this. This is like the other society. So they could start exploring things. And then they started getting onto the fact that they started going, well, this society is so rigid and so like social structure and there's all this going on. Let's explore all the things that we can't talk about in our society. And because we're talking about Victorians, we're totally not talking about anything that's happening in Japan. So a lot of the things like in the Victorian age, counter all the kind of high class society was also all the counterculture, all the like the underground theatres, the like, you know, the first ever like burlesque shows and like things like this. And so there was a lot of repressed sexuality going on in the Victorian era, because obviously all those things were seen as bad. So it was a great playground for Japanese authors to write about repressed genders and like girls kind of being able to like break out and do amazing things, because you can do that in an alternate Victorian Britain, because you can't do that in Japan. And so they kind of like started embellishing on it more and more. I'm going to go to my notes now. But yeah. And then the other aspect that the Victorian age seems to have really inspired is its ability to have more supernatural beings than any other period of British history. Black Butler being the perfect example of this, especially like, I mean, apparently there's angels and demons. I don't know where they've all gone now. Apparently, like, our monarchy is not that exciting and we don't need like demon servants to help solve our problems. I think actually in today's society we probably need this more than the Victorians did. And then tales like Jack the Ripper, the romanticisation of Jack the Ripper in like Japanese manga and anime is insane. It's popping up like all over the place, various tales of whether they're not a good guy or a bad guy. So this leads on to Japan's wonderful export from the Victorian age, the idea of Rusai Kembo. This was a very famous Japanese theorist whose name is Masamune Nakamoto. In 1875, he went on a journey through Europe to try and find out the root of what made the ideal woman. And after spending much time in Victorian England, he decided that the good wife and the wise mother was this wonderful thing that was going on in Europe that they had to bring to Japan. And it's unfortunately it's still today, this is the vision of the ideal woman. And it's basically had this idea that in order to raise a better hegemonic society and better children, you needed a strong female in the home who could be a good wife, and she could look after you and raise good children, because if you raise good children, they will grow up to be the next pillars of society, which goes on to today. There is very much in Japan, woman is still in the home. She's the wife, she's the mother. It's changing a little bit, but I will get into that a little bit later. So, as girls, these are what we must be doing. So, you know, you have to have like an education philosophy. So, you know, you want to educate your children. A nice ideology on like how to be a good woman. You must have domestic arts. So I hope, yes, we're all taking up our like flower trimming, that's not even what it's called. But, you know, needlecraft, that's it, needlecraft. Be gentle and graceful. As a dyslexic, I feel that this is not fair, because I think I trip over every table going, and I'm the least graceful person that ever did walk. You must serve your husband. So, you know, he is the king of your home. And yes, your absolute obedience to your father and husband. Just absolute obedience. And you must crush other women's desires and ambitions. So to be the ideal woman, if you want to be the ideal woman in Japanese society, make sure those other women, you crush them. Make sure that they don't get any ideas of being individual, of speaking up, of not wanting to be servants. So this has continued into Japanese culture to this very day. And this is why they started translating those early children's stories based around girls, such as Alice, such as Little Women. They decided that it was time that girls started getting an education, because they're never going to grow up to be good wives and good wise mothers if they aren't educated. They're not going to learn how to be graceful and diligent like those good Victorian schoolgirls unless they know about it. So the government decided the best way to educate girls is to give them examples of how good Victorian girls behave. And they started bringing across these original novels, translating them so girls could start getting their education and being obedient to their men. But as with anything of literature, it evolved. Like Japanese female writers started taking these stories and writing their own versions. And the very first novels were Hana Monogatari, which was the genre of writing that eventually became shoujo manga. And these were stories where they had all these ideals that the Victorians loved, such as pure love and innocence. And they started writing these stories about girls that could escape from what was expected of them. So the Hana Monogatari were the earliest stories, like really, really early like Yuri titles where like young girls would be able to find love and would run off, or would be able to like fulfill their dreams by going on a magical flower picking adventure. I mean, there weren't, you know, it wasn't extreme stuff, but remember this is still like early century. But it was finally girls started having like escapist fantasies where they could do things that weren't being raised to become, yeah, mothers and obedient wives. And this is where we meet Alice. So Alice became very popular in Japan, particularly in 1983 when they created the first anime series for her, but she was first translated in 1909. So she's been in Japan for a very long time, and she has gone through so many reimaginings and reinterpretations within society, from being a symbol of purity and innocence to being a symbol of kind of like decadence and escapism, to being a character used to control the mindsets of young girls in Japan. So the popularity of Alice in the UK was the fact that she was a girl that did not want to grow up and be a wife and a good mother. She wanted to escape her Victorian everyday like chores, governess and lessons. So she escapes to a whimsical world. We all know the story of Alice in Wonderland, and most of us know that it's pretty much like one girl's escape into adult lunacy, basically. Like each character is more redonkulous than the next, and they're all representations of like adults. They're like the Queen of Hearts is like the corporal punishment aspect of the governess she had. So all these little things you can read into it, and she was just basically kind of like, by the time you read it through, you're kind of going, grown-ups can be mental. If you're a small child and you're being told, do this lesson or you'll be beaten, you're kind of like, how is this regular, normal life? So she kind of decided to go through this in her Victorian fashion and escape into whimsy, which is what Japanese like girls reading the stories also wanted. So we get to the youth culture. So the reason that I believe that Alice has taken off in contemporary Japanese society so much is because of the horrendous pressure on Japanese youth culture. I mean, I don't know how much you guys know about kind of like what's happening in Japanese schools, their education system, but it's pretty much like test, test, test. Like you're like, they've got expressions such as the nail that sticks out must get hammered down. So they are a big believer in homogeny. Like everybody must be the same, everybody must be perfect. To make one great Japanese nation, you must all be perfect. You must not stand out, you must not do anything too whimsical and too out there. You must get the top scores, and it's only gotten worse. Like I can quote like animes that are happening now that are dealing with it. If anyone's watching Assassination Classroom, they know that it's like, that's what's happening. Like, it's gone to the next stage where you now have the class that you kind of push down to make the other classes work harder because they don't want to be in that situation. And then Japan has a school to work system in which when you graduate, you all go to the graduation fair. All the men must wear the same suit, all the women must wear the same dress suit, the skirt must be a certain length, it must be that everyone must wear the same outfit. They go to the fair and all the job booths are there, and depending on your scores in your tests and your education, the companies will recruit you into their company, and that's your job for life. Like, there is very little later transition into other jobs in Japan. You kind of like, you go from school to the best job, and if you don't, then you're stuck in your ruts, in your salaries. And then for women, obviously, they go into their job with the knowledge that you will eventually become a housewife. Right, that's it. It's got even worse in Japan because now women have to have dual contracts that they can sign. So if you want to enter an office environment, you can sign either the career track or the office track. So if you want a career, you must sign the contract saying, I promise that I will not have children, because you can't give 100% to your company if you need to take the time out to be a mother. But so a lot of women end up signing the other one because they're like, you don't know if you're going to not have children. So there's a lot of pressure put on them. So as youths, they've got to have somewhere to escape to, and Alice became like a perfect like example of like we just want to get out of this. Like, we need to go to, like, the adult world has become even more insane and lunatic. Let's go to another place. And Alice, I think, became kind of a symbol to that for the youth cultures, especially when her influence on the fashion scene and the birth of Gothic Lolita fashion. Talk about it next? Yes, I do. So, the iconography of Alice in Wonderland. It came about firstly when the Disney film came out, and Alice's blue dress first appeared in the Disney film. Japan went, that is good, we will take that. Japanese street fashion loved the Victorian age just as much as it loved everything else that was going on, and this new wave of youth started taking everything that they were being told about the Victorian era and started going, no, we quite like the outfits from this. We quite like this, like, and the birth of the Lolita fashion rose in Japan, and it became a great way to dress, to prove that you were different from what everyone was meant to be wearing. It was your way of finally kind of going, no, I'm different, I'm standing out, I'm an Alice. And so there was things like this. Alice and the Pirates was one of the first brands. I've never done the Gothic Lolita because it's a little too cute for me, but I could see why they did it. I think they could pass with that youthful innocence, and it became really, really popular. And then the birth of even crazier Alice created things. The Alice in Wonderland restaurants. I don't know if anyone's seen the array of exciting restaurants they have in Japan that's catered around pretty much any thought you can pop into your head. But Alice has her own chains of labyrinths, restaurant labyrinths, where you can go, and it became really, really big business. But this is where it starts going back in a full bizarre circle, because first it was brought across in the Victorian age to kind of educate girls, then girls took it as a symbol of counter that education, but then it became commercialised and became a way for making money out of the girls that were into it. So so going round and round in this weird circle. It's a bit of a funny place now, because if you read, there's an author called Sharon Kinsella who writes about the birth of cute culture in Japan, and through it you kind of work out that girls and boys who like the cute culture, they were buying it up, they were dressing like it, they were rebelling, and then the people who made money cottoned onto this and started producing more stuff, so they started buying more stuff, and it became a commercial thing rather than an escapist thing. And then they were able to start implementing like fashions and products that kind of made them, oh, I really, really want that. And then fashion bands and things that kind of behaved like that. So girls started going. The great case is AKB48 with their Suyobi no Alice, which is far too sickly a song for me to like. I watched it and I was like, oh goodness, but it's all like, be perfect, be lovely. So all the girls said, yeah, I want to do that. And then they started acting even cuter, and even lovelier, and even more innocent. And it was like, isn't that totally counter to what you started doing? Like you're now kind of being brainwashed by your own escapism to actually act like totally innocent, cute, passive little girls. And it's like, this is a bit not quite like where it was meant to be going. So here, fashion magazines to the Alice look. Like that's when you know a society has totally managed to kind of commercialise a counterculture, when you can get mainstream magazines that teach you how to dress like Alice and how to behave in a cute and innocent fashion. It's very cute, but at the same time, yeah. So then the Vocaloids came along, and they do a series of songs of the darker kind of Alice, which was far more appealing to me. But these were a whole set of songs about like human sacrifice and black markets, in which Alice in Wonderland was like, oh my goodness, the adult world is so crazy, I don't want to do this, I want all this stuff for myself, I'm going to go to Wonderland where I'm allowed to murder people and I'm allowed to do whatever I want. And it's like, and then so Dark Alice kind of appeared, and she was the new escape for girls who didn't want to be pacified by cute Alice they were being taught about in the magazines. This was the like escape into a wonderland of like desires, like leave all this cute passive behaviour, leave your school system behind, but be careful, because if you indulge in it too much, then you're going to kind of like get lost in it. And if this works, do have to. There's the little button. Button. The button. It's on his watch.
あるところに小さな夢がありました。
誰が見たのかわからない。それは小さな夢でした。
小さな夢は思いました。このまま消えていくのは嫌だ。どうすれば人に僕を見てもらえるだろう。小さな夢は考えて、そしてついに思いつきました。人間を自分の中に迷い込ませて世界を作らせればいい。お城からの招待状はハートのドラム。4番目アリスは双子の子。好奇心から不思議の国。いろんな扉をくぐり抜けてついさっきやってきたばかり。気の強いあなたは賢い弟。一番アリスに近かったけど二人の夢は覚めないまま不思議の国をさまよった。
Alice, a slightly more cautionary tale of if you want to escape into your dark fantasies and take control of the world and kill off people, then you may also be corrupted and fall so far into darkness you can't return back to our world, which again is a very interesting kind of evolution of the story. And then, woo, Alice in anime and manga. There have been so many different representations of Alice throughout anime and manga, it's just too many to count. I mean, Miyuki-chan Wonderland, by far one of my favourites, by Clamp, in which Alice falls into a bizarre world populated by very aggressive lesbians. And so Alice basically spends 12 minutes running around while everyone is trying to seduce her, and she just really just wanted to try and get to school. It's brilliant. It's wonderful, and it's got this continuous loop score that goes round, and it's just, if you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's one of the best interpretations of Alice in Wonderland out there. Then you've got things like Pandora Hearts, which uses the iconography and the mythology, and then there's ones that so you can claim have aspects of Alice in Wonderland, like Rose and Maiden. They play the Alice game to see who will become like the ultimate Alice. And then Dead Man Wonderland, which you may have noticed, I slightly like the things that falls into the darker camp. But Dead Man Wonderland, I mean, there's a white rabbit and everything, and it's basically their Wonderland is that horrendous prison where you go to kind of basically see how horrifically tortured and murdered you can be. So it's a rabbit hole you really don't want to fall down. Girls are now kind of fighting back against the images. As I said, there's now a little bit of a coming to a head of where Alice and where this idea of like innocence and youth is compared to escaping from your innocence. As the pressures in Japan get worse, young girls are trying to find more outlets for kind of like counterculture, especially once they start leaving school age and go into the workplace. The newest phenomena is the office ladies, or the parasite women, as they've been lovely called by the government. These are young girls in their early 20s that get office jobs, but instead of getting married and having babies, they decide to not get married and have babies and spend their wages. But because they're not married, they get to stay at home with their parents for longer. Like, you know, some of them stay home until they're like 27, 28. So because they stay at home, they don't pay rent. So they are basically, according to the government, there's a new breed of parasites that are sponging off them because they have decided to use their money to go out and have fun. It's a bit of a problem. It's interesting that Japan is making legislation about things that to us is very normal for a woman to kind of go, oh, I've got a paycheck, I might go out. But it's a big deal. And then the rise of like meat and frita in Japan, which is the class that are not going straight from school to education, that are trying to do music, do art. Like, they don't want to have this 9 to 5 insane job life that's going on. And they're trying to get away from what was the 90s was, you know, it's bad when the Japanese have to create a word that basically, kireru culture, which it means snap and kill culture, because during the 90s so many teenagers were just losing it from exam pressure and snapping and either killing themselves or others. There was in Golden Week, I think it was 1999, where they were on a school trip on the bus and the boy just took out a knife from his bag, stabbed the bus driver and held them all hostage because he didn't want to go anymore. He was just like, no, I'm done with school, I'm done with school trips, I'm done with exams, so I'm going to kill everybody on this bus. And it was like, and that really kind of has risen up. They kind of seem to be getting around it, but now with this new, like, if you don't work hard enough, you'll become the bottom, kind of their new way of trying to deal with it. God knows what's going to happen to all these kids in this new generation of bottom class, because it's only literally just beginning. There we go, little list of, if you haven't seen some of these, check out Yuki-chan in Wonderland, it's brilliant. Dead Man Wonderland. Then the newest craze is, I think her name is Rosa Quinn, and Alice in the Country of, she seems to be very prolific in the interpretation of Alice in various ways, and her art style's gorgeous, so it's something that's worth looking into. I was going to then see if anyone had any questions for, it's pretty much me finished talking. Yes.
When you said that companies come to schools, is that schools at like 18 or is that university level?
It's just after university, I believe, when they go into their, it's when they graduate from uni to the fairs.
Colleges.
To the colleges, yeah. It's terrifying. I've seen the pictures of it, and it's just like everyone in the uniformed dress, haircut, just lining up. And then you see the pictures of it, they all look very happy at it, like, this place has employed 25 of the best students from this university, and like, yeah, like, that's your job for life, like, for life. You want to then later leave, like, a mid-career transferring is very...
People go to offices and they're there 4 years and they're still a new guy.
Yeah. And it's like, and then the office, I mean, I could talk separately about, like, the office worker culture, because, again, Japan, I can't remember it now, have a word for... they have a Japanese word for when an office worker commits suicide, because it was so prolific during the 90s in Japan. the 90s is a rough time. But that's why it's called the lost decade, because they're trying to they're like, we're not going to talk about the 80s, which automatically meant to go, this is going to be what I spend the rest of my life researching.
So it joins quite a few other decades that Japan would preferred one from.
Yeah, but I mean, because the big thing is 1989 when the economic bubble went, and Japan went, shit, basically. They had the 80s where they had more money than sense, everything was going wonderful, and then it all just disappeared, and they had the rash of adult suicide and stuff, which films like Battle Royale kind of comment on and stuff, and then youth culture just started going, what? Wait a minute, all of a sudden there's rising suicides in the older generation, I'm not going to respect them anymore, and then they started that's when the culture came in. And it's just interesting, for me, something with Alice is the fact that it was brought over as a tool to get girls to behave, then became a culture thing, and then money government saw a way to kind of turn girls back into cute, mindless, I'm so cute, and now, and then when you interview guys and stuff, and when you read the interviews, and guys are like, the ideal girl will be this, this, and this, and you're like, the innocent, the sweet, she will have a glowing smile, and, she will serve me tea, and you're like, guys, you've got to get past this Japan, because they're, and then there's all these other things, we all know that there's declining birth rates in Japan, so they've got to get past this innocent Alice and start realising that girls have their mind of their own, and then stop calling them things like parasites the minute they get a day job and want to spend their paycheck. It's oh my goodness,
A question about the parasites. There's been legislation in to stop them?
It's not how do I put it? They started writing up rules for legislations that companies could fall back on so people wouldn't do it, such as the 2 contract things. Companies can legally make you sign a contract saying, I won't have babies. So if you have a baby, that company has grounds to fire you. Because obviously in the UK, if someone fired you because you got pregnant, there'd be a big hoo-ha, but this covers their back. Then they're trying to none of it's gone through, none of it seems to be passing, but it's a big hoo-ha in the conversations between the politicians and stuff on what can we do to stop women having part-time jobs, stop fritters and meats, because we want people, because they want to have one society, one thing. There can't be any of this individual and stuff going on. So they were talking about there's things like taxes and benefits and stuff that you will not be allowed to have because you have chosen this lifestyle. A great example of it is things like single mothers are not entitled to benefits because they've chosen to have a baby and not go to work. But it's some of those single mothers, their husbands have died, but there's very, very little in the way of support for single mothers in Japan because they're one of those things that don't exist, say disabilities and mental health. It's
I thought Japan was worried about his declining birth rate.
Yes.
Quite confused.
They're very,
They had an investment train kids with robot babies. Kind of explains a lot.
yeah, they have got one of the worst declining birth rates possible. I don't know if it's quite got Korea bad, because in Korea for every 1 girl in the class there's 10 boys. And it's just and also all the girls are growing up kind of going, I don't want to be housewife and mother to this, and a lot of the new ones are kind of trying to find the Western boyfriend. The parasite women, a big problem, which is what they're saying is one of the causes of declining birth rates, is because the parasite women are going out and partying all night and then hooking up with Westerners. So therefore they can't find their Japanese husbands to serve.
But it will actually raise the birth rate.
It would, but they're then
It's not the bird thing.
it's not the one, because we all know that as much as I love so much about Japan, the nationalistic kind of racist aspect is quite prolific. So, the mixed race children, it's not what they want. They want good Japanese children that are going to... And so they try and do it via media. There's all kinds of things. They've blamed Otaku on the declining birth rates because they say that men are spending more time playing computer games than having sex, and it's just and then they're going, but it's because they like watching anime so much that they're never going to go out and go on dates, and then the women are kind of going, well, he's not going to talk to me, why would I want to go on a date with him? It's people, you can't just like you've got to just be more open-minded on like what your female culture can do. You've got to get over this like, be cute, be innocent, have domestic arts, you know, gentle and graceful, and serve your husband and look after your home.
Don't forget, be young, then vanish from view.
Yes, yeah.
I
There we
think
go,
that was 2 governments ago, wasn't it? Where they're you know, where you have a back to work campaign in the UK. In Japan, they had a buck off and leave work campaign.
yes.
Wasn't it something like let fading flowers wilt gracefully or something? It was this campaign that it would disturb office workers to notice that women got old. And so if you were hitting your late 20s and your makeup could no longer cover the fact that you were going to get old, stop distressing your colleagues and get home.
Yeah, there's a very big, you can't be over 30 in the workplace.
There's stuff like that in some of the animes I've watched, like Gurren Lagann and Naruto. So, you know, some of the women, they have them young and then they show them old, but they don't show their faces because they don't want men to see that women are going to get old.
You have young women in Crohn's, and there is nothing in between.
Yeah, there's none of us 30-year-olds. I don't know where we go, but apparently we're like. But yeah, it's I mean, it's interesting with anime and manga because a lot of the stuff is like more open-minded and more like willing to show you what's going on in the culture than what their culture is. So as a Westerner watching it, I'll watch something and kind of go, this is like I mentioned, Assassination Classroom. Very entertaining, but I'm sitting there going, yeah, this has totally got that social commentary vibe because this is actually this thing that they're kind of laughing about and stuff in an over-the-top way. This is actually kind of happening. Obviously, there's no alien in the classroom in Japan. I hope not, actually. But, like, you know, that kind of, like, this weird system of, like, if you don't do well, you'll end up like these guys. And I hate to think what's going to happen to these guys. Like, in 10 years' time, I might be doing a panel on, like, the rise of, like, chaotic classrooms that just turn into weird gangs that roam Japan. But
do you think there's a good example, though, that the teacher that really cares about the students is the alien?
yeah, that's always the one. There's got to be something in that. Now I'm going to have maybe some research.
I feel like the grammar schools thing in the comprehensives in the UK, where the people they push to the bottom actually all end up getting vocational jobs and earn more than the people who went into them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, a lot of them are like going abroad to get work and stuff. But the problem with Japan is they just don't make it easy. If you go abroad for too long and come back, you somehow become foreign because you've lived out of the country for a certain amount of time. So they're like, well, you're not really Japanese anymore. Yeah, you become westernised and therefore you're not pure race. And I'm like...
Well, there's actually it's a major problem in Japan at the moment with the top end of business. And certainly said the schools and the conformity is the sort of the way that's being pushed is explained to me. There is major concern about the big companies that have always been going out into the world with new product, like Sony and things like that, about the lack of innovation in Japan. If the schools are pushing even more towards conformity, obviously that's one of the root causes of it, because you'd be questioning and non-conformity to actually make progress.
Yeah, unfortunately, they've got and the big problem obviously in Japan is there aren't any jobs for these kids to go to, because if you're a guy and you get your job for life, you won't leave the company until you're 70, which means there's no one retires. So how are you going to get a job?
It's a similar problem in France, but France have the French have the option. They come here. And the French government it was about 6 or 7 years back now, they were actually debating in Parliament the fact that all of their best and brightest graduates were going to London to earn money, because you weren't allowed in Paris to earn more money than people that were older than you. Whereas London were like, do the hours and do the job, take the money, I don't care who you are. so yeah, it's not so different. There's parallels with the UK, there's parallels with France. No one's actually got a solution for all the problems.
No, I mean...
Japan can't really go over to China.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, like, everywhere's not exactly doing very well at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just, my fascination with Japan is by how much they're kind of going, we're great, we're fine, we're great, we're fine. You're okay.
So now you're drawing parallels with America as well.
Yes.
Is there much of a lesbian culture, or is that swept under the rug as well?
That is very swept under the rug. With fringe cultures such as like gays, lesbians, transgendered, if you are in the entertainment industry, it's okay. So if you are gay, lesbian, transgendered, yeah, dyslexic on its word. Yeah, you can be in the entertainment industry. So you can work in the like Okama bars. You can do you can do television, music, that kind of thing. But in real life, because obviously the idea is that when you do you guys know about the S system, which is a beautiful schoolgirl? Okay, so basically, the S system in Japan is in all-girl Catholic schools and other all-girl schools, predominantly Catholic schools, because those look so good in Britain that they imported it. This is where things like Maria Sama Gamitubin came from. Basically, if you're the year ones and there's a year twos, you come into school, you get assigned a big sister. And this big sister will be your best friend, and she will look after you, and you're encouraged to have a beautiful relationship with her. And this is what like the early Hannah Monogatari stories always wrote about, how this beautiful relationship would turn into love, and you would run away, and it will be beautiful and tragic and stuff. And the idea is, if you had this big sister and you worship her, you've noticed in how many animes the girls always seem to kind of like, there'll be one girl in the class that comes in that always has long hair and is really smart, and all the girls are like, oh my god, as if like a boy idol had come in, and I'm like, and they all seem to like kind of fancy her. It's because you're meant to kind of like idolise this girl because she's beautiful and perfect and intelligent and stuff. And if it develops into more, fair enough, no teenage pregnancy if you're a lesbian. So yeah, but as long as by the time you graduate, you kick those lesbian habits and you're ready to find your husband and be a housewife, it's okay. The problem comes with the ones that it's like, you can't just stop being a lesbian magically because you graduated from Catholic school. So, yeah, there's a lot of that. Same like with gay culture and stuff, it was the same with the boys and the boarding schools and stuff. As long as you weren't going out and getting girls pregnant, fine. But make sure that by the time you graduate, all that's gone, because you have to be an office worker and make babies to like, you know, to continue the Japanese race. It's fascinating, a bit bizarre, but
That seems to be a little important from the situations of the samurais always had a younger one.
yeah. Well, the thing is with the samurai culture, that was one of the things that when the borders opened during like the Meiji period and the Victorians started coming in, they started going, oh, well, that's not right. Like we're Victorians, like that is not proper. Like why? Like no. So basically, it was literally during that period when they started going, oh, we better make homosexuality illegal then. And it was like, and so, thanks Victorian England, like one of the more open-minded societies basically went, yeah. It's funny because like, we all laugh at the Victorians as being one of the most repressed periods of like British history, but to think that like Japan like idolised it so much that it set up its own modern society based on those values and can't let them go now. It's like, we've gotten over the Victorians, we've done fine now, but they're still kind of going, ooh, we don't want to be seen as the savages, so we better still, you know, conform.
How far do you reckon, like, rough timeline, do you reckon Japan's way to get this serious feminist movement going? Or like women's liberation, or whatever you want to say?
Oh, God. Okay, so...
We need a date.
To actually seriously get a feminist movement. Okay, so when Hiroshima happened, they brought in, I can't remember her name now, I've gone completely blank, it's just a bad researcher, but they brought in an American female politician to help look, because they basically took that moment to rewrite like the laws, the charters and stuff, and she sat down and realised that in all, like who gets rights and all their charters and all their laws, there wasn't a single one for women. So that's when they first started putting in legislation saying that women could get paid to do jobs, could have a say, could get into parliament and stuff. Like, so now there's some women politicians, there are a few kind of popping up, but it's like, I mean, the Second World War was like, what's it, I always get my dates wrong because I keep forgetting we're in 2015. So, but it's like 40 odd years ago, probably more, because I've decided everyone's 40 years.
Yeah.
Nearly 70. I put everything as 40 years. If you ask me when the Khmer Rouge, like Pol Pot was, I'm like, that was 40 years ago as well. But it's like, but I don't think it was, but everything is 40 years ago. So 70 years, in 70 years, women have got rights. Yay! So I'm thinking for them to have an actual, like, proper feminist, like, I mean, Japan's now in the age where they're re-educating them through bands like AKB48. If you actually sit down and listen to some of the lyrics and stuff of some of their songs, you're a bit like, okay, weird. And then they get like, because we're now in that like cute culture as a commodity phase. So women are not going to be doing anything strong and feminist while they're buying into let's all dress really cute and have...
Japan's really good at creating distractions.
Yes.
Very, very good at creating distractions. So it's very, very easy to kind of do those sorts of...
The feminist thing, one thing to note about Japan is after World War II, there was actually a big communist movement in Japan, which the Americans were very efficient at. And so a lot of the revolutionary urge in Japan never really developed during the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, because in the 60s they had the student riots.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh wow, the students rioted, this is amazing, stuff will change. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
I think they're years off anything like that. They really they need something. I don't know what could push them past this idea, apart from the women themselves.
You would have thought the breaking point would be in the 90s when they were having the suicides, but they decided to suicide rather than riot against the system.
Yeah, that's because
Japan
has that whole
that's the direction
deep-rooted
they went instead of
loyalty, the harikiri culture. They're like, rather than try and progress or stand out, it's better just to kill yourself. Which is not really helping them either. Sorry, you were asking.
That's cool. My question, thoughts about the AKB48. Basically, those bands, aren't they manufactured by music guys for the big brothers, the older guys that like buying those records, which kind of emphasises...
Yeah, AKB48, I can't remember the name of the guy, but if you ever watch the AKB40 documentary, like behind the scenes of what's going on, you're just like, oh god, it's terrifying. These poor girls. But basically, yeah, because AKB48 is manufactured as a product mostly for the male clientele that used to come to the theatre in Akihabara and stuff. The thing is this male clientele now expects that to be the way all Japanese girls to behave. So you've got this choice now. You either be the girls that behave like that or the ones that rebel. And the ones that rebel are obviously getting all these horrible labels and stuff and just not. And then the ones that are kind of going, oh, I want to act like this. Yes, I want to be cute and and it's like, it was fun when it wasn't being done for commercial reasons and it's not being done for men. It was when it was their own and it was like, yeah, we want to act like this because this is how we want to act. Like when we went through like the punk phase and the new romantics and the goth phase, like we always ever did these movements with us, with music. There's always the youth culture that kind of like defines what's going to change in that generation. Unfortunately, Japanese youth culture is so brainwashed between schooling and some of what's going on in their industry and stuff. The only thing that really has very honest voice most of the time is the anime and manga, because all the little problems and all the little dark sides and all the like issues are all in there. And because these are the artists and the creatives that can put their point of views and things into this work. So it always gets me annoyed when people kind of go, oh, anime, it's just cartoons, and like, don't ever say that to me. This is not just a cartoon. This is something. Some of them, yeah, I'm not entirely sure, like Nyanpire, what quite cultural like commentary it had about a vampire kid. But you know, it could have been something, you know. Or some of the
Penguin Drum.
Oh, well, that one's a huge one because that's Sarah. But yeah, some of the stuff I watch, clearly no social commentary. I think I've gone through about 5 animes featuring pretty boys that dance. And I'm like, so maybe that. But some other stuff isn't. I mean, we've got things like Assassination Classroom and Terror in Tokyo. We have Mariah and Penguin Drum, that was a couple of years ago, which it taken them about 15 years to do anything that commented on the sarin gas attacks, which is obviously the biggest terrorist attack in Japan. And how many people knew that it happened outside of Japan? how many people in Japan really knew that they like their equivalent of like September the 11th, and it's kind of like, shh, it's okay, so all go back to work. But if you get a chance, read Murakami's Underground. It gives you a fascinating insight into where people's mindsets are.
Do you think like a new kind of culture could be born from people training? Because I mean, sorry, I'm praising them really badly, but like I was watching Turning Girls recently. I don't know if anyone else here has seen it. It's like it's a comedy made by Trigger, the guys who did Inferno Cop, and it's about like four girls in their 20s who are sort of on the cusp of becoming 30, and worrying about becoming old. One of the characters is this washed-up idol girl who wants desperately to be an idol and sort of do all the cutesy sort of innocent fitting in thing that is like demanded of Japanese culture. But of course, it shows her day job, and she's just she's like a cleaner in some office, and the end of one of the episodes has her sort of singing one of her really sort of happy sort of idol songs while staring sort of dead-eyed on the train. And I was just thinking. Do you reckon anything would ever sort of, I mean, I get the impression that quite a few girls sort of aim for to sort of fit in with these sort of cute images through stuff like idols and stuff, but ultimately sort of kind of wash up and then get sort of punished for it.
Yeah.
So do you reckon that could ever sort of turn into anything else? Or?
I think eventually, this might not be too far, I think that late 20s, 30s age bracket is going to do something, because I think being a 30-year-old woman in Japan is finally going to have to kind of go, no, I don't want to have a kid, no, I don't want to sign away my uterus to this company, no, I'm not a parasite because I spent my paycheck on a night out boozing, or I bought some clothes. I think they'll be the ones that start making the movements, and I think the girls that maybe some of the ones that are in this we laugh at you class will rebel in their own way, which might trigger something more. I mean, a lot of the time generations move through film and music, and unfortunately because the Japanese music scene is so controlled by the big companies, their music industry isn't pushing rebellion. So I think at some point a whole host of 30-year-old women are just going to storm the Diet and go, excuse me, they've got to. And I think some of the ones that are getting into politics and stuff, I think they might rise up and start doing little movements. But
everyone kind of, it seems like a lot of people feel isolated, like they're the individual, like nobody else is in the situation. It's just possibly the reason why the suicides happen. If they felt that there were other people that were in the same situation, they may not have done that. They may have kind of grouped together.
I think with social networking and stuff, I think
the internet's going to kind of link a lot of these people together, so maybe something will come from that.
I feel like I went slightly off topic, I'm sorry. This is Alice to social problems in Japan.
Well.
Oh.